All right, today's Cannabis Industry Insights is Medical Cannabis Ecosystem, and that's brought to you by Marigold. They've helped us curate some panels before, so we're really excited. Bridget and the team always brings us some amazing content and speakers. And to the speakers, thank you guys so much for coming and taking the time out of your day to do this. For anybody who might not be able to watch the whole thing or wants to send it to a friend or a colleague afterwards, we will be sending the registration link to everybody after, and it will be available on our website and our YouTube channel. And we will ask everybody to reserve Q&A to the last like 15 minutes or so, although you can still pose your question in the Q&A platform, and Bridget and the rest of the speakers will get back to you then. So enjoy, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to the Medical Cannabis Ecosystem. We're delighted to join all of you today. And we've got an amazing team of speakers and panelists who are going to bring different takes on the medical cannabis ecosystem as we move forward. We've got Joel Taylor from Joel Taylor. I'm going to turn it over to you. Dr. Chris Spooner, Dr. John Gow, Larry Dykstra, and myself, Bridget Hoffer. I'm the founder and co-founder and principal with Katie Pringle over at Marigold PR. And I'm just going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we're going to get down to some great questions. Joel, let's start with you.
Hi there. It's nice to meet everybody today. And Larry, it's actually really good to see you in person for the first time. I've done lots of communicating by email, so it's nice to see your smiling face over the internet today. My name is Joel Taylor. I am one of the founders and principals of Patient Choice. We are an online medical cannabis sales group here in Canada. Our office is based out of Calgary, Alberta, but we are nationwide in delivering products to Canadians across the country and providing medical access to a large portion of licensed producers, and we're focusing a lot of our attention now on ACMPR production and providing Canadians with starting materials across the country as well. It's kind of a new and exciting niche for us, and we're really looking forward to working with our fantastic partners to get those products out across the country to excited, new, and some growers that are a little bit more long in the tooth across the country. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Welcome, Joel. Dr. Chris Spooner.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me along. It should be an interesting little conversation here. I'm a naturopathic doctor up in the North Okanagan, and it's an interesting journey on this. I've done a lot of work in regulatory, having conversations about trying to get naturopathic physicians the ability to authorize cannabis. Also work as a chief scientific officer for Heritage Cannabis. So we're doing product development and formulation there as well too, and then various other consulting gigs across there. It's been probably about 12 years I've been working in this space. Originally I had patients coming in, bringing me Rick Simpson oil and asking me what was going on and what was happening with that. So it's been an interesting process watching patients kind of navigate, MMPR, MMAR, ACMPR, and now, the current regulatory framework as well too. And in my work and sort of from a regulatory standpoint, I've had lots of opportunity to interact with government. And then I'm also a clinician. I see patients, 4 days a week. And I have a very interesting take, from a more integrative practice. Patients seem to be much more willing to talk to a naturopathic physician about sort of cannabis. They sort of just lump that into sort of complementary alternative medicine. So it's given me some really interesting insight into what patients are looking for, a little bit outside of sort of the standard cannabis community as we start seeing the different demographics that start to come in here. So a little bit different appreciation. And then the other really interesting thing about this is that so much of this really kind of, you're seeing very much a parallel of what was happening with sort of natural medicine, integrative medicine, herbal medicines, from when I started practicing 20 years ago to what that looks now. And cannabis is following a very similar type of trend line on that. And I think there's some things that we can learn about that, both through product development, how patients access and use this, and then also how do we expand the group of clinicians that are able to work with patients. And so, I work with medical doctors, chiropractors, naturopathic, massage, all the rest of these types of things. And each one has different unique needs. And definitely as we've watched the legislation roll out, there's been some interesting peculiarities, and we'll dig into that for sure. So I'm looking forward to having that conversation.
Great, great. Welcome, Chris. We're excited to hear about a the naturopathic perspective. John Grove from Manitoba. Welcome. I think you're muted right now, maybe. There we go.
Is that better?
Yes. Hello,
Sorry
John.
about that. So I'm very grateful that you invited me to this panel. Thank you for having me. I've been blessed with a pretty colorful career in cannabis. I've been growing cannabis and producing extracts for about 25 years. I started in the legal industry, I guess it was 2001. I opened up my first hydroponic store, and that was quite a treat, getting to work with patients and really getting introduced to the legal side. I then opened up a website in 2003 and really got connected and networked all across North America with all different kinds of people from the industry. So that was pretty cool. I joined the MMAR program as a designated grower and as a patient, and have also had a chance to work as a master grower for a licensed producer for about 4 years. And now I'm working as an independent consultant, just helping growers, micros, and anyone who needs help growing.
Fantastic, fantastic. An incredible breadth and depth that you're bringing to our conversation. Larry Dykstra, welcome.
Thank you very much, Bridget. I appreciate the opportunity to chat here. It's nice to meet all of you. Joel, we've chatted a fair bit. It's nice to put a name with a face. I appreciate that as well. We are a greenhouse facility, actually 2 facilities in southern Ontario in the Niagara region, in what most people are familiar with as wine country. The first generation is sort of getting a little older, me being one of them, and the next generation is starting to take over, and they wanted to look into producing cannabis and hemp, mostly for medical reasons, and just to have a new outlook on where we were going to head as a company. So in November of 2019, we got our sales license, and we got the ability to start growing cannabis and cultivating. We went on to get our sales license, and now we're selling to 2 provinces and 1 territory out of both of our ranges. One range is for hemp only, the other range is for cannabis and hemp. And me and my wife had a chat probably about 5 years ago. And when we talked about getting into this, and that we wanted it to focus on how it could help medically, how it could help patients, how it could help veterans, and things like that. So that's sort of the background of what we've managed to get to.
Well, thank you so much, Larry. There's an incredible commitment and breadth and depth of experience on our panel today for medical cannabis. And really what we're going to talk about is the medical cannabis ecosystem. It's so difficult for people to navigate. It isn't easy to know where to get answers. And I hope that, through the next hour or so, we can cover off a lot of your questions. And as Danny said earlier, please add questions as we move through. So I'm going to start with Joel. And Joel, let's address the big issue right off the top. What's the biggest issue facing medical cannabis patients right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, unfortunately, there's no real easy answer to it. But, one of the main things that medical cannabis patients are facing today is just, strictly getting access to it and ease of access. Canadian medical cannabis patients are faced to go through a really, a complex process that, involves medical clinics and having to meet with the medical clinics, which is fantastic. They need the education. They need to understand what it is that they're getting into and how they can treat their symptoms. But the government has set it up so that, it's not as easy as it should be. It's difficult for a patient to move from licensed producer to licensed producer and to really determine what kind of products that they're looking to get a hold of. So, in working with great clinicians like Dr. Chris and some of our other partners in the industry, we're really trying to streamline that process as best as possible for medical cannabis patients. But at the end of the day, there's just a lot of regulatory hoops that we as a medical sales provider and groups like Larry at Dykstra Farms from a regulatory compliance position that they have to jump through, and then of course doctors and medical providers, whether it's a nurse out in Ontario or a GP out in British Columbia or Alberta or in one of the territories, the regulatory compliance issues that are having to be met on our side to get a patient through and get a patient access to medical cannabis is really quite difficult for them. And what we're trying to do at Patient Choice is streamline that process as much as possible by aggregating licensed producers in a single place where a patient only has to move through that sign-up process once. They can visit the clinic of their choice, or the family doctor, clinician, or nurse practitioner out in Ontario of their choice. Have that document sent to a centralized producer like ourselves. Well, we're not a producer, we're a sales agent, I guess, at the end of the day. And we like to get that document, get them centralized so that they can reach out to as many different licensed producers as they want. And as we aggregate those producers, we want to give patients access to not only medical cannabis from flower and oil and 2.0 products, all the way right to starting materials. And that's why we're working with fantastic groups like Larry and his team at Dykstra Farm. We want to make sure that there's a legitimate, legal, way for medical cannabis patients to affordably access starting materials across the country in a timely manner. And groups like Larry and the team at Dykstra are really starting to dial that in. And that's one of the big problems that we're facing, is just the overregulation of medical. It's important that that regulatory process exists and that there are stops put in place to, make sure that the process is above board so that insurance companies can get involved and groups like veterans can have access to Medivie Blue Cross and their products can be paid for. But really, one of the things that is just so difficult for a medical cannabis patient is, especially, a patient that's already dealing with a severe health issue, or they could be not as technologically native as some other folks are, is just moving through these processes. And we really want to make sure that we provide an environment to make it as easy as possible. And it's something that we're refining every day. And we really love the input from our patients and our partners so that we can continue to make that process a little bit easier for them to navigate.
Okay, so those are really important issues. Like the biggest issue is over-regulation, and it's kind of complicated in terms of the ease of access too. So thanks. I mean, I think everybody's nodding and as we're watching. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Chris, and maybe we could just talk a little bit about in terms of over-regulation, etc. Why are nurse practitioners and MDs the only professionals that can authorize medical access to cannabis? And how does this affect care and access? Just taking it next step beyond what Joel was just talking about.
Yeah, I mean, this is, when we talk about overregulation, there's overregulation and there's almost bureaucratic abuse is where I would go. And I've worked with multiple LPs in the initial stages and watched just that regulatory process, and that's compounded by a government that, in my mind, never fully committed or believed that there was a medical pathway or that there was a medical valid use for using cannabis. And so what ended up happening was that, there's sort of this half-hearted type thing. It's like, oh yeah, all these pot smokers, we're just going to get them and whatever, they're going to go away. And the reality of it is, I can tell you with my patient demographics, and again, the LP that I'm working with, the products that we use, what are our top selling products? What are people asking for? CBD vapes, CBD extracts. Those aren't recreational products, right? So, and again, I've sat in the Minister of Health. I've talked with their senior advisors. In Ottawa, I had a meeting there 2 years ago with them. And I presented to them and I laid out, and I was doing this as a representative for the Canadian Naturopathic Association and the BC College of Naturopathic Physicians, where I was sitting down going like, look, you guys have created a regulatory framework that you've cobbled together from various different elements. And you've created a Frankenstein monster that combines the worst of alcohol, tobacco, nutraceuticals, and pharma. And this thing lumbers around and it's unresponsive. And not only that, no one will even stop and take a look and consider what's going on in terms of the framework from a provincial versus a federal regulatory standpoint. And I'm going to delve into some stuff here that's probably going to bore some people maybe a little bit. I'm hoping I can get you passionate about this, because what's happened is that basically the government decided that they were going to take narcotics control regulations, which in that is a federally regulated it's a federally regulated. And what that is that if you're a medical doctor or a nurse practitioner with prescriptive authority, your regulatory college in the province, the one that oversees and issues your licenses and regulates you, makes a submission to the federal government and says, we would like doctors and this healthcare practitioner to be added onto the restricted substances prescribers lists. Okay, and that makes sense because of the opioid crisis and all the rest of that. You want to be fairly restrictive with that. And so provincial government and ministries of health had to submit to the federal government and say, we want this, and they had to go back and forth. And what I've seen from this standpoint is because naturopathic physicians in British Columbia have prescriptive authority. We can write prescriptions for antidepressants and antibiotics and all the rest of that. Most people don't realize that. And so we said, hey, can we get on board with this? And then at one point in time, government was actually like, they're wanting more because they kind of unloaded this onto the medical doctors. And the medical doctors said, no, we don't want anything to do with this. And that became the first problem. And then the pharmacists, they're like, we don't want anything to do with this. And then the nurse practitioners kind of got in, and then the medical doctors kind of came on as they were kind of forced into it. But that's a lot where the crux of the problem lies, is that it's the narcotic control regulations and the definition of what they have for a healthcare practitioner. If you look at Part 14 of the cannabis regulations, they specifically say a healthcare practitioner can authorize that. Now, the interesting part of this, and this is where the problem lies, is if you go to Part 8, which is drugs with cannabis, under that, they use another term called practitioner. And under that, the practitioner is provincially regulated. Okay. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that your regulatory college can then sit down and decide, hey, we want our practitioners to be able to prescribe this. And if you have prescriptive authority, we can now authorize this. And so there's no need for the federal government to get involved. But when we've sat down, and I was on several boards that looked at, working groups that were talking this, the lawyers on our board, because we have a constitution of our board, or it's constituted to have public members and private members, or public members and members of the profession. Our lawyers on this said, well, we're looking at this and we don't understand. There's a contradiction because we have practitioners, which is provincially, and then we have healthcare practitioner, which is federally mandated. And there's an issue of what's called federal reciprocity, or there's a concept that says that federal governments and provincial governments won't write legislation that overlaps or infringes on their various regulatory frameworks. And so this is a case where this is happening, because what's happening on the provincial regulatory colleges is they're looking at this and saying, what was the mandate of Parliament? And it's not clear. And it's not clear because the terminology, just healthcare practitioner versus practitioner, makes a huge difference in bureaucraties. And so really that's where this issue starts to come into. And what I've been promoting all along is like harmonize the language in the regulation so that you have practitioner, because that's that's the practice of medicine, which is regulated provincially, versus the production of medicines, which is regulated federally. And we've blurred those lines, and no one is willing to look at that and deal with it in a fairly expedited way. It's like, well, you can make the submission and we'll review the legislation, and that's going to take 2 to 3 years to do that. And in the meantime, we've got patients that are stumbling around through this thing. They don't know what it is. In Vernon, we had 16 illegal dispensaries at one point in time, and everybody thought, oh, it's legal now, I'll go get it. And so that opens up a whole list of issues. So, I mean, that's as much as I can summarize it. So hopefully, we haven't lost too many people drop off.
I don't think so, because there's a theme emerging here in terms of the regulation, ease of access, and now information. And it's not just for the patients, it's for the people providing the care and service through the system. So that's a great answer. I'm just going to turn it over to maybe move a little bit off, change topics up a little bit, and I'm going to turn it over to Larry. Larry, why is transportation such an issue right now for medical cannabis and LPs?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So when I look at it, right now, being winter, of course, in the majority of this country, we have a hard time keeping anything alive in a truck that's not virtually overnight. So what we're trying to do is work as best we can that we get things shipped out to the patient as fast as possible. Try to send it out as early as we can in the plant size stage so that it's well rooted, and then we package it a different way so that it can get to the end user in as quick a way as possible so that it's only in a box or in without sunlight for a limited amount of time. We've been doing that now for probably well over a year, and we've tinkered around with it, and it seems to be working well. Now, I will say recently we had one little issue, and we're working on that. So I've had a chat with Joel via email in regards to it, and I think we're going to make sure that we even warranty stuff, because I think it's pretty important that when a patient is looking for a number of cuttings or a number of clones so that they can grow their own, so that they can have sort of their own access to make whatever medicine they need. I think it's important that they don't have to worry about what are we going to do this during the winter? How are we going to get this done?
Yeah, yeah. And how is it going to, take that burden off them, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And Larry, what do you think is the most difficult? What makes getting a plant into the hands of your clients so difficult?
Well, there's a couple of things related to that. Whenever there's government restrictions or government regulations, it takes a little while. Sorry, it takes a little while to make sure that it's getting to the right people in the right amount of time without too many restrictions. And I know in some of the provinces and basically the federal government has made it that everything has to have a stamp, everything has to be Health Canada approved, and all those things make sense. But when a medical patient needs some cannabis in the form of a plant to grow their own, if I have to wait 2 weeks to get the stamp, if I have to wait, and then I have to wait several days for the regulatory allotment to be so that I can send it out, and then I try to get it there as fast as I can, it can easily take a month. And by the time you got something that you ordered today, like when I ordered yesterday a cover for my snowmobile, and today it's here. So I think in the cannabis industry, we have to try to do that quote unquote Amazon thing. Mm-hmm. And I hope that when people hear this or listen to this, that they realize that, guys like Chris and Joe and Jan, they're trying to help everyone. And we're not doing it for any other reason than to get them, especially the medical needs, to get them out there. Mm-hmm. The regulations on flower that you sell to the OCS or to any of the stores in Saskatchewan or Newfoundland, that's all fine. It's just the patients are the ones that I think we need to focus on. That's what sort of brought all this about. And it's one of our company's sort of goals that we really work to help patients, and we've been helping vets too now, because that's in the same category as far as I'm concerned.
Wow, really the commitment across the board for patients from this team of panelists is just incredible, I have to say, and deeply appreciated, I'm sure, by everybody. I'm listening. Well said, Larry. Nailed it, Larry. There's lots of good comments in the chat.
Thank you.
John, what are some of the challenges you have seen with patients who are looking to grow their own cannabis? We're talking about shipping, we're talking about purchasing, yes. But what about people who are trying to grow their own cannabis? What are some of the challenges there?
Well, I watched a lot of the challenges in the early stages of the industry, and it was accessibility to a medical practitioner who would prescribe. So finding a doctor that was open, and that was willing to talk cannabis and that would give a grower a prescription. I remember in the early days seeing the first MMAR licenses that actually had photos on them. I think that was around 2004. And the program really didn't expand. I saw, because I had a grow store, so I saw the early people coming in. And literally some of the patients that would come in the early days, I hate to say it, but they were very ill. They were, you know, sometimes in a wheelchair, sometimes in a cane, sometimes a Medivan would show up. These people were definitely the early pioneers of the industry that were truly sick. And those people were trying to grow on their own, and they didn't have a medical practitioner to really give them access. So that was the early problems from around 2004 to 2008 I saw. Between 2008 and 2012, I was selling grow equipment online. I had closed my retail store down, and that's where I saw an explosion of the MMAR licenses being issued. So I saw a transition from the struggle to find access to a doctor to the struggle to find a knowledgeable doctor. Because around 2008, 2009, it became almost, there was a lot of activity where doctors were prescribing big prescriptions, and the program was somewhat being abused at that stage. And it was easy to, it was like a pay to play system where you could pay based on a plant count that you wanted. And there's no medical program where you can walk in and say, I need a prescription for Percocets. Can I pay you $500 for 50 or $5,000 for 500? You know, whereas with plants you can. And that's to me that's just wrong, because I as a medical patient, I shouldn't have to pay more because I'm in more pain. So
Exactly. Yeah.
I saw a pay to play system where they're charging me more. So it went from looking for a knowledgeable practitioner or looking for a practitioner that would just sign you to actually finding someone knowledgeable. Because after that influx of a lot of people growing, you had a lot of people that genuinely needed medical knowledge. Like, a lot of people want to grow their own and enjoy that whole process, but there's a lot of people that want to do that don't know anything about it. And really finding a good, honest, knowledgeable practitioner, I think today is still one of the hardest things. There are a lot more doctors that are focused on the actual science behind it, but there were a lot of doctors that were just signing prescriptions just to make a buck, and that's not really progressing the industry. That's just sustaining it. It's not actually, nobody's getting better off with that, because they're not educating themselves. They're not getting any knowledge. To walk in and pay $500 and get a prescription is nice, but if you didn't get any knowledge or any science behind that and you really wanted it, then those people suffered. So I saw that pay to play system sort of be a little bit abused on the cultivation side. I can't speak from a medical side or anything. I'm just speaking from seeing an influx of growers come to me. And so I think that's definitely a challenge, is a knowledgeable practitioner that can give them the advice that they need, that there's some science behind it.
Absolutely. So, and you know, earlier in the conversation, in your introduction, you mentioned that you had come from the legacy market.
Yeah.
And so, you know, do you feel that the medical growing programs have been compromised over the year by illicit activities that could limit, you know, accessibility to programs in the future?
I do and I don't.
Okay.
I see that it's given a bad name to, like, there's been a few bad apples that have spoiled it, but I think they bring more negative attention, but they're not the base of the programs. They're a very small percent. Unfortunately, they garner a lot of the attention, so it makes headlines when you see a medical license is being abused. The news media likes to put that forward to say, hey, you know, this program shouldn't be good. Look, there's these people abusing it. You know, for every 1,000 people that are growing, you might have one that's abusing it. That one's going to garner more attention than the 999 that aren't. Okay. So sadly, I think some of the negative attention has, but no, I don't think it's compromised, because I think there's so much good coming out of the program. Like for my patients, for example, I grow for a nurse. She works on the front lines, and I grow for a retired carpenter. They both can't afford to buy their cannabis. They both don't know how to grow. I've been providing it since 2012 at zero cost to them. I donate over £1.50 pound every month, and no charge to these patients. And so to be able to do that, you know, when I look at that stuff, and I know other growers that do that stuff, to me, we try to show the integrity and the good of the program. And I want to always make sure that I represent the program that treated me so well, and I've seen it treat so many other patients so well. I want to make sure I always contribute to giving it a good name, because I really do believe they are good, and I don't feel that that illicit activity should compromise them, that they should be replaced or taken away. I think some of the prescription numbers can be abusive. Like, I think when someone's walking in and paying thousands and thousands of dollars to get a 5,000 plant prescription or whatever, I think that needs to be looked at, but I definitely don't think it should be compromised at all.
Okay.
I think these programs do too much good.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for that insight. I'm going to go back to Dr. Chris Spooner, because one of the things that he talked about is that, licensed naturopathic physicians are left out of this for patients and a bit. And so, we're all trying to find a good advisor, a trusted guide through this process is really important. Dr. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, right? Is that these are plant-based medicines, and it's always interesting. I mean, I've done lots of presentations presented to pain management groups and physicians groups and all the rest of that, and there's this sort of thing like, well, cannabis is this mysterious box around what's going on, and as I sort of mentioned previously, we do multi-polypharmacy all the time. And we've got people on antidepressants and sleep medications. We got on anti-anxiety medications, et cetera, right? And so, the issue starts to become is having this ability to kind of work with multiple compounds. And then, with plant medicines in general, it's difficult because there's a lot of subtlety. Well, I mean, with cannabis, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, when it's working, and it happens pretty quickly. So that really is, kind of where I've kind of sort of said, with my patient practice, and what we see is that people are coming in and, they're not growing their own echinacea, they're not growing their own Oregon grapefruit. These are products that are produced out there. And if you have the understanding of what we call pharmacognosy, which is the understanding of plant-based medicines and the interaction of all the various different components of it, that's something that's super important. And I think, this leads into the issue of, what are we talking about with education for patients, and what are the opportunities? And this has been one of the areas that I've been super frustrated about, is that we can't have patients, whether those are herbalists or whether there's naturopathic physicians or whatever, or even pharmacists to that extent, because some of them have a very good understanding of what's going on with these multiple different compounds. How do we start to have the C and CBD, but how do we start to talk about CBG, the other cannabinoids, the flavonoids, and the different strains and that? I mean, I've got patients that come in, I sent off, I've got a number of patients that are MMAR growers and things like that. And I said, hey, this is working really well. You're getting amazing results. Let's take it and get it analyzed. Well, to go through that whole process and get it analyzed and take a look at it was really interesting. But I had one come in, it's like all CBD. I looked at it, it's like there's no CBD in it at all, but it's loaded with THCV, CBG, what else is in there? A bunch of terpenes like beta caryophyllene and that. Like, it was cool. Like, I mean, this is really, like, no wonder why this stuff is doing what you're saying it's doing, but it's not the CBD. And so that's where that educational component and being able to have that knowledge to understand it becomes key.
So you've thank you for that. You've coined the term functional cannabinoid medicine. What does that mean? Yeah,
and that's, again, there's a whole term in sort of integrative naturopathic medicine called functional medicine. And basically what that is that we take a look at a person, we do a very deep, in-depth intake on patients and try and understand sort of the underlying mechanisms that are happening in people's bodies, the functions, right? And we look at that in a holistic perspective. And really all it is applying, cannabinoid medicine in this functional approach that says, okay, look, we're dealing with somebody like PTSD. What else is going on there? Well, we know that there are a whole bunch of different changes and stress hormone responses and sort of the way the nervous system works, parasympathetic versus sympathetic. We know that these people don't sleep, or there's issues with sleep. So how does that start to impact things? And so there are a series of different things that you can be doing to address those that are outside of cannabis. I do a lot of work with personalized medicine and genomics, and so nutrigenomics. And so there's really interesting stuff about, the way neurotransmitters are made and nutritional supplementation, like something like serotonin, for example. If you're inadequate in certain B vitamins or lack certain amino acids and can't convert them, you can't make those. And serotonin leads to melatonin and sleep. So there's an understanding of these biochemical pathways and building them out. The last one that I'll just leave you with is there's fascinating stuff around omega-3 oils. And if you're inadequate and you're not taking the right type of oils in your diet, that can directly impact your production of your own endocannabinoids, anandamide and 2-AG. And so those become really, really critical. And so you need to take a look at patients in a larger context, make sure that they're supported both nutritionally, mental, emotionally, and a whole person perspective. And that's really what that is, functional cannabinoid medicine.
I love that. I love that, that entire overview. Thank you. Joel, I'd just like to touch with kind of as we're getting deeper into this conversation, what do you feel the next steps are? We've talked about ease of access. We've talked about trusted guides. We've talked about transportation. What are the next steps in the medical cannabis ecosystem that you think that we should be thinking about?
Next steps for medical cannabis has got to be insurance coverage for all Canadians. It's difficult for, Health Canada to provide a DIN number for cannabis, which is a drug identification number, because cannabis plants, whether they're grown LP to LP, the same genetic plant grown at one LP is significantly different than another compared to a home grower. To provide a DIN number for that is very, very difficult. So, getting it, moved into, traditional medicine where it's something that's legitimately prescribed, not a recommendation for a product. That's going to be a real challenge for Canadians. But thankfully, some insurance companies are starting to step up at this point. Medavie Blue Cross is a prime example for providing, cannabis access to veterans where it's covered. Understanding that this is something that people are using to treat, anxiety, PTSD, these types of things. It's incredibly important that, Canadians, all Canadians have access to this and have access to insured care in this. I think if COVID-19 has really shown us anything, is that, the healthcare and system in Canada needs to be head to toe medicine. It needs to be dental. It needs to be everything. We really need to look after Canadians. And, I don't think that cannabis is an alternative medication. I don't think of it as, something like that. Just because you can grow it at home, I don't think it negates the validity of cannabis as a real medication. It's a little bit mind-boggling to look at all of these studies that come out where it's treating, severe depression, it's treating anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, seizures, epilepsy, and then to have this medication, something that, a Canadian could produce at home for themselves, to still not be covered by an insurance company, to me is absolutely mind-boggling when, the side effects of cannabis are so much lower than, the massive drug cocktail that a parent would be feeding a child with epilepsy. It's just, you don't want to shame the government for it, but it's really and truly, it's time to get with the program and start to provide Canadians with medication that we deserve, to deregulate so that we have better access to it. And for insurance companies to step up and recognize that cannabis really, really is a true medication. And it's not just some snake oil that we're all selling out here, on a harm reduction strategy to provide people with access to a product so they don't get pinched walking around with a bag of weed. It's absolutely ridiculous that this isn't legitimized. We're calling it medical cannabis in the country. It should be treated like a medical product as opposed to this halfway between product that the Canadian government is choosing to recognize it as. I guess that's my big cannabis medical rant over there. But I feel like a lot of people are on page with that. It's time to if we're going to call it medication, then it's time to recognize it as a medication and really cut the BS around it.
Exactly. Dr. Chris wants to say something, and then I'm going to go to Larry after that.
Yeah, I think this is a really key thing, right? You've got this situation where many patients now are just accessing it through the recreational routes, right? And again, that's a whole different conversation about how companies select and create their products and how they enter them into different distribution, in retail stores and things like that, and so that's interesting. But really what it comes down to is why that authorization is so important and the medical designation is so important is what's called the duty to accommodate, which is a requirement. So when you've got somebody who needs an antidepressant or needs a pain medication or whatever, they can go to their workplace and they're not going to have to be worried about having a drug test that suddenly is going to cost them their job, right? And if you've got somebody, I had a patient the other day, I've got a guy, he's got a nasty condition. It's called hidradenitis suppurativa. And basically what happens is he gets these massive abscesses and fistulas in his skin. It's incredibly painful, and he's on pain medications and all the rest of that. Well, we started using a topical cannabis on this and a CBD and this type of thing. And it worked really well. The problem is he works, up in one of the mines up in northern BC, and he's like, well, I can't use it up there. And so now when I go up there, like he's literally going to doctors in the emergency room and saying, cut this open and drain these abscesses. Like he told me the story the other day of basically going to this doctor, and they can't anesthetize it. So they're basically plunging the scalpel and cutting out 6 of these things at a time. And he can't use cannabis because he doesn't have this medical designation that would say, like, look, I can use this topically, and if there's a little bit of CBD or a small amount of THC in my system, I'm not going to lose my job or have my employment in
Right.
that. And so it's the duty to accommodate. And then when you go to the choke point, which is this is only medical doctors, why aren't other prescriptive authority, prescribing professions, naturopathic physicians, pharmacists, these types of things that have that opportunity? And it's not difficult. I mean, it's not like this is some sacred tome of medicine that we all have to enter into some sacred cult to learn about. I mean, read the papers, share the knowledge. I mean, we should all be able to learn. So certification processes, educational thing, content, those become really, really key.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great. And important to think about the impact of having the distance you have to go to seek care, right? And the impact. So speaking about distance, et cetera, Larry, I'm going to ask you 2 questions. The first is just, why do you think there are so many government restrictions for LPs wanting to sell to medical cannabis patients? And then maybe you could describe a little bit about your successful shipping method in terms of sharing information and sharing success, as Dr. Chris was just talking about.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So one of the first things that I realized once we were building our LP was that there was a ton of regulations, a ton of restrictions, and all those things, they made sense. Until I started to see some of the smaller facilities, like a microgrow. I went to visit a microgrow where the person literally has a fence around a barn, and he was allowed to start growing. So now it's some different rules and some different regulations, but when I start comparing the two, from the extent of all the cameras, the fencing, all the regulations, it really becomes it's not an easy thing to do. That being said, if it was easy to do, everyone would do it, but everyone can do it in their backyard. So it starts getting to me, it starts getting ridiculous. We did our application to have sales so that we could start selling to the different provinces. And I'm not going to criticize the government during COVID, but when something takes 5 months to turn it around, that to me is pretty restrictive. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, you can only have one of these applications in at a time. So you got to really select what's the most important thing you want to do. If you want to expand, that's one application. If you want to get sales, that's another application. You can only deal with one at a time. So there's a lot of restrictions that way. And then when it comes down to it, if those restrictions are there for LPs and even for micros and all that stuff, it becomes, when it's that restrictive, it's tough to get it to an end user. So right. when you start talking about patient choice, for example, they're setting things up, so they're trying to skip 3 or 4 of the steps. We have a couple of veterans that we take care of. The amount of work that we have to do for these veterans, it's just like one of them called yesterday, and I said, just call the guys at patient care. They'll take care of all of it. They'll remind you to get your license renewed. They'll remind you to take care of this and take care of that. An LP, we can't do that. So that's one of some of the government regulations that have kind of slowed us down. Sorry, what was the second part of
the second question is, this is because I think we're starting to get some questions from the audience and some interest questions. In some previous conversations, thank you for the LP question. We talk about sharing information, and one of the things that you may want to share with the folks in the conversation today is describe your very successful shipping method and maybe the pivot as well. I think a lot of people would find it interesting and useful in terms of transferring plants.
So we started getting sales of clones to, believe it or not, Newfoundland, and we developed a system where we thought we could send these clones over there and everything would be good. But by the time you ship something, whether it's through Purolator, Canada Post, or like FedEx or any of them, it's a box to them, and they toss it around like they would a box of shoes or anything like that. So we came up with an idea. We bought it out of England. We bought these almost like a container. I wish I had one here, but it's almost like a container that you would buy for muffins. And you literally put the clones into the container. It holds 6, and that container folds around the plant, and then it clips closed, and the guys usually put tape around it and stuff like that. And then that container is the exact size of the glue plugs that the rooted soil that's in there. It holds everything tight. It can be shipped upside down. It can be shipped right side up. It can get tossed around, and then it's inside of a box so that it doesn't move. And we started doing that as a result of trial and error. We started doing that now. It's probably about 8-10 months, and we've had virtually no hiccups with it. And it was something that when we chatted about it earlier, I got a call from another LP, actually from a micro in, I think it was Edmonton. And she called me and asked about it. And I explained it all to her because she said, you know, is that proprietary or anything like that? And I said, no, like the idea to us is if we all use the same shipping method, and I'm from a greenhouse background, so every greenhouse ships product the same way so that the plants get there properly. So when you take this same thing, if people in BC are shipping it the same way as we are in Ontario, as they are in Newfoundland, the patient or the end user will get the best plant possible so that they can plant it and it'll give them the results they need.
Yeah, and it really speaks to that commitment to the end product and that commitment to the patients having some ease as well. So that's an incredible story. John, I have a question for you. What are your thoughts about, based on what Larry's just talked about patients growing plants for themselves or purchasing from a regulated system? What do you think about that?
Well, I always lean to home growing. That's my base. That's where I've come from. Since 1996, I've been a home grower. So, but I do think that a new grower attempting to start probably, and if they're relying on this medication for daily use, I think you're best to look into a regulated supply chain for a daily supply while trying to grow your own as well, because there's a learning curve to it. And I think a new patient that is really relying on a steady supply and that wants to try growing for themselves, they might not hit those results. So my advice to people is while you're pursuing your growing, definitely make sure your prescription is taken care of. The regulated supply chain 5 years ago, say, wasn't very good. There was a lot of poor product, but it's improved significantly now. There's a lot of producers out there that are growing really good product that's really clean, it's really dialed in. So the supply chain is good. The price still needs to come down a little bit to make it more affordable. And that's where I lean to home growing. There's a lot of people that just can't afford these prescriptions, even on some of the budget plans. And I feel for producers because I've worked as a master grower in a licensed producer. I've worked with micros starting up. I know the cost to set these up. I know what goes involved. And it's easy as a patient to sit back and criticize the price and criticize this and that. But there's a lot that goes in it. So I don't like to jump on the producers for the price as much, because it does cost a lot to produce. And that is slowly coming down. That's why I advocate for home growing, because you can keep those costs down. But I think if you're new to growing and you desperately need that reliable supply, then do both, but maybe not count on your own home grow to supply it. You can also look at the designated grower program, finding a grower. Wow, that's what I do for people. I'm a designated grower. A lot of my friends are as well. We got into the MMR program like that. And that's a really good way for a patient to supply. But again, those are hard to come by nowadays too. There's not a lot of people that want to go out and set up a grow and do all the work and then hand that over for nothing. You know, it's hard to find that. So the designated grower kind of program that's a bit of a challenge, but I do think home growing is good. But like I said, I think with the regulated supply as good as it is now, I think going both ways is the best.
Okay, thanks, John. That's great insight. And a terrific answer, kind of balancing it out. We have a question from the audience. From Roger C. It's to Larry. Larry, what's the name of the company where you get the containers for shipping plants?
I knew someone was going to ask that, and I don't have it.
That's okay. We can follow up.
I did look it up after our last chat, because I wanted to make sure that they came from England, and they did. Is there a way, whoever has the question, I'll gladly send them the answer. I just don't have it on the tip of my tongue. I'll send it to you, Bridget, and then you can forward it to whoever.
That's great. We'll follow up. So we just have about 3 or 4 minutes left, and we don't have any more questions from the audience. So I think I'd like to start just kind of wrapping up, and maybe if you each take, 30 seconds or, just a couple of seconds to just give your last best advice for medical cannabis patients navigating this ecosystem. So why don't I start with you, Larry, because you're right here, and then I'll go to John, Chris, and then Joel.
Well, first of all, let me thank you for hosting this, Bridget. This has been interesting. I've learned a lot from all the other guys talking. I would suggest to patients, especially patients who need it for sort of stress relief, try to be as patient as you can. I agree with Jan that growing a little bit yourself is probably a nice way to sort of have your stockpile of essentials. Like if you grow a decent plant, you can get a pound out of that, and a pound of cannabis, a pound of flower should help you for a good long time. And then you can tweak it by going to doctors like Chris to help you out, because he'll know what types of things to do. But my biggest advice to patients would just be patient and let people help you, because guys like Joel can get it done in a pretty quick fashion, but it takes a little bit of time. That would be my advice.
Thank you. Thank you. John, what's your advice?
My advice is don't get frustrated with the system and give up on it. It's constantly improving. I've watched this system and these programs start in the early days. I've seen it be so hard to get access. I've seen so many challenges, and I've seen so many of these overcome. It's constantly getting better. And my advice to patients would just be, like Larry said, you have to have patience in this industry, and just stick with it and don't give up on it, because once you get in the system and you get working with medical cannabis, it's worth the effort. So that's my advice, is just stick it out, and it'll be worth it when you get there, because it's constantly improving, and this industry is amazing. And to see the challenges that have been overcome in the time frame I've been involved has just been awesome. So that's my advice. Definitely just stay positive and don't give up.
Thank you, John. Dr. Chris Spooner, your advice to patients as we navigate this medical cannabis ecosystem?
Yeah, I would say that, we're seeing, and I would agree. we've created a program that, is definitely leading the world, and we stepped into this space and created something very unique. And I think we definitely, don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater on that. I think as we see the evolution of things like patient's choice and where you can contact a nurse practitioner, things like that, and start to get that. I mean, ask when you're looking for these things, or when you're asking about, if you're buying it at a store or a retail store or something like that, ask them about, do they know of any of these groups that have access to, nurse practitioners or other clinicians that can do it, or other services or well too, because they are out there. It just takes a little bit, and I think, being able to get the word out about, these opportunities, from my standpoint, we'll continue to fight the fight on this side. Certainly, I mean, if you wanted to get more involved on a, politically talking with your politicians, which may or may not be helpful at times as well too. But, I think patients, as they start asking the questions, as they start demanding and standing up and saying, no, I want this as medical, I'm going to go support things like patient's choice and the access that you get through that, or other different frameworks. But, that suddenly becomes a way that, you get the medicine, you get the standardized formula. The one thing I would say is that, we definitely need to acknowledge medical is going to grow. We've got patients that are growing themselves. The vast growth is yet to happen as we start seeing what happened in the nutraceutical space, as that next bulk of people who come in and dip their toes into it. And so looking at standardization of formulations, understanding our testing, and figuring out what's going on in terms of our product of quality, and more information and education is key. So ask questions. If you don't know something, ask some more and be persistent on it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Joel, any last advice from you?
Yeah, register with Patient Choice. Come check us out. Give us a chance.
Exactly.
Obviously we gotta pitch the company, and check out some of our fantastic partners as well on the site. You can check out all of our producers on there. And to everybody's kind of point here is that don't lose hope. The system is difficult to navigate. Groups like Patient Choice are here to help with that. We're here to help you. We work very hard to advocate for patients. We're constantly harassing our local governments to, make changes in this. We've got crazy people out there, from our licensed producer partners to guys like John, who have been out there for a very, very long time, advocating for patients and waving that flag, saying, these things need to change. Change is coming. It's just one of those things that, we have a very huge bureaucratic machine. And I know it feels like medical cannabis has been out there forever now, but, in the reality of things, as far as the government goes, this is a brand new thing. And, they're really trying not to let the horse out of the barn, because once it's out, it's really difficult to claw that back. And so you can kind of understand where the government's coming from. But, we live in such an instant world, as Larry so succinctly put earlier, you order something off the internet and it's there the next day. And unfortunately with medical cannabis, it's just not there yet. And, we'll continue to advocate for that to be the future of this thing. And, guys like John and Dr. Spooner, of course, Larry as well, out there just, pounding the phones and screaming at their local governments and, fighting with Health Canada to fight that good fight. And we're doing the very same thing here too at Patient Choice. So we'll continue to advocate for our patients. And, if you really want to see real change out there in the medical cannabis industry, you got to help advocate for yourself too, because it can't just be a handful of nutters out there waving a flag all day long. We need everybody to shout in one voice and make it very clear that we're ready for some change, and we're ready for a little bit of deregulation in the industry. So.
Great. Well, this has been an awesome hour, I have to say. Thank you, John. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Joel. We've touched on so many things. We've talked about access and regulation and care, et cetera. And I think the most important thing that we've heard is that there's a lot of information and education and well-informed people out here. And you're certainly representing that. So thank you very, very much. And thank you on behalf of, everyone who's participated today. And if you have any questions, please reach out to Patient Choice, or reach out to Bridget Hoffer, Bridget at marigoldpr.com. We're here to help as well. So thank you very, very much. Okay, well, wrapping it up now. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.